Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Wilson Center. I'm Paulo Sotero, the director of the Brazil Institute. On behalf of the Wilson Center and of Prospectiva, international consulting firm in São Paulo, Brazil, our partners in this event, I would like to wish you a good afternoon. Thank you for being here, for accepting our invitation for this, which is the fourth seminar in a series that we started last year with the notion of, with the idea of including the topic of innovation, not very well understood, I believe, in Brazil, in the discussion. As the country emerges as a global power, as the country achieves success, being increasingly recognized by the world media in both economic terms, in social advances, etc. The Wilson Center, as you know, honors the 28th President of the United States, the only president to come from the academic world, and a man who used to say that the thinkers and the doers should get together because one improves the work of the other. This organization was established in 1968 by an act of Congress. We have included over the years, in addition to the policymakers, the professors, the researchers, also the business community, the representatives of the civil society, to expand dialogue in many different areas. The Brazil Institute was created in 2006, and I am very proud to be its leader since its creation. It's a very felicitous moment for us to be having this today. This morning I woke up, got my New York Times on the front page. There is a very interesting report by their correspondent in Brazil. Strong economy propels Brazil to world stage. It's sort of a relief to read this type of news. Most of you know that I'm a journalist, particularly after having such a frustrating setback earlier this week in Geneva at the Doha Round. The discussion on innovation takes into consideration precisely this Brazil's emergence in the world stage. And this understanding that we need to dare, actually, in areas that we have been less creative, maybe in policy areas we have been less creative, in order to really fulfill the promise of that this moment has for us as a nation. This seminar, as I told you, the fourth in a series. We are releasing today the report of the third seminar held last April at the Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of São Paulo. We held two seminars in São Paulo, both at the University of São Paulo. This is the second to be held in Washington. All the reports, the three reports of the initial events, semi-discussions, are available on our website, as the report from this discussion will be. The third seminar focused on international strategies for innovation. It was a very interesting discussion based on a study financed by the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development and coordinated by Glauco Arbix, whom I hope to host here as a public policy scholar next year. Glauco is now studying the impact of Brazilian multinational companies. And this study was very, very revealing and enlightening to us. It compared Brazil innovation policies with that of the United States, Canada, Ireland, France, the United Kingdom, Finland, and Japan. Today, we are going to go focus more in detail, I think, two areas having to do with innovation policies. The first one, perspectives on Brazil's national innovation system and the role of patents and biotechnology in the agro-industry. And the second panel, we'll talk about the business sector innovation, competitive strategies for growth, and public policy challenges and opportunities. I would like, though, to, before I start, and I will be the moderator of this first panel, to recognize in the audience Deborah Wynne-Smith from the Council on Competitiveness that has worked with Brazil with the Movimento Brasil Competitivo led by Jorge Gerdau. It's a special pleasure to have Deborah and some other friends here, but this link is very important to us because last year we honored Jorge Gerdau with the Woodrow Wilson Award for Corporate Citizenship in São Paulo. I will now move to the first panel. We have you have their bios in detail, or more in detail. I would like to introduce, though, Professor Ricardo Senes, International Relations of my alma mater, the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, who is the director and partner of Prospectiva Internacional. We'll hear after from Roberto Castelo Branco, former Deputy Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization and currently a consultant to the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, a federal company of the Brazilian government known as Embrapa. And it's a pleasure to welcome back as a commentator Stefan Marrow, Executive Director of the National Academies of Science Board on Science, Technology, and Economic Policy, who accompanied us in our second event on this series at the School of Engineering at the University of São Paulo last November. So I will ask Ricardo Senes to start us off. Ricardo.
I think it will. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here again with my colleague, my friend Paulo, and other friends and colleagues. I will present today briefly part of the discussion and the research that we have been done at Prospectiva and other institutions related to a very important and strategic issue that is innovation, intellectual property, and economic dynamic and economic strategy of Brazil. As you see, this presentation is very much focused on recently paper that we written with my colleague Mendes, focus on patents, specific on an analysis of the patents in 10 institutions in Brazil. But I will start this discussion, as we have during the lunch, a very hot discussion, or a warm-up discussion. I will start with some brief comments, general comments about this, the issue of our seminar, and after this I will go to specific to the study, some of the results of our studies. Well, I think this, from our perspective, is a general view about the question that has been in the center of our interest for during all this program, as Paulo mentioned, this last 4 seminars and a series of papers and interviews. Brazil has some of the most important elements for a new innovation boom. I think as a bottom line, it's very important to have in mind. Brazil is not, in this issue, is not starting from the zero. Brazil is starting in a very good position. That makes the problems different. It's not less problematic but just the problem is different when we try to analyze this. But at the same time, we have still a lack of market-oriented dynamics for innovation. I would say part of this is related to the regulatory framework, part of this is related to the company culture in Brazil, part of this, of course, is related also with policy. And we still lack a better regulatory institutional framework for IP innovation, etc. We have had very progress in this area, but still have something to be done. And finally, I think we have discussed this briefly also during the lunch. In our view, we have a rare consensus in the Brazilian society related to the importance of innovation. You know, Brazilian society has different political players, different political groups, and we have discussion and disagreements in several different policies, for instance, the foreign policy, for instance, the macroeconomic policy. But I would say that in terms of innovation, we don't have opposition, I would say, an organized group in the country that do not support the idea of innovation. So do not have the enemy is very good. I would say, I don't say that is enough, but to consider this issue as a consensus, you have a very good ground to discuss in the Congress, in the executive branch, with the state governments, companies. That, I think, is not something that we can leave aside. Some of the most important elements that support this idea, this hypothesis that we have a very good potential momentum for an innovation boom, is we have a local scientific base quite good. Some data that has been produced by Brito Cruz, that I think is the most brilliant guy that has been working with this data, show this. For instance, 10,000 new PhDs a year are produced in Brazil. The scientific production grows 6 times more than world average. This is measured by articles in indexed magazines and reviews. So there is very well-known installed industrial capacity, market dimensions. Several public institutions focus on research innovation. The purchasing power of the state, that's very important. When this purchasing power is linked to innovation policy, I think Petrobras is more or less a good example of this. IT and telecom infrastructure in Brazil, it's quite good. And, of course, the biodiversity that we have in a very unique way. Also related to some policies. I will not go deep this. I will just give some example how this consensus has been producing some good policy. I would say not enough, but very good policy. For instance, the intellectual property law in 1996, almost 2 years after the WTO Uruguay round approved the TRIPS agreement, we produced a very good law. We have problems in implementing this, but the law and the framework is there. We have been pursuing good other initiatives like the industrial, technological, and foreign trade policy initiatives that is more related to Lula's government in the first term and the second term. Creation of IBD, that is an agency that coordinates this industrial policy in Brazil. Special innovation, driving credit lines by BNDES. We have just discussed briefly how the traditional Brazilian Development Bank have been trying to move from the traditional sectors to innovation areas. It's not easy. They have to rebuild the business plan analysis for approving of credits, but they are trying, and we have some good examples on this, mainly in the IT sector, much more than in the biotech area. FINEP, that's another example, etc. Modernization of Brazilian Patent Office, INPI, with a lot of problems. I will show this for you, but the modernization process is there. Innovation law in 2004, the called good law in 2005 that related to tax benefits for companies that invest in research and development. So there is several different initiatives from the government that try to put this the question of innovation in the central of the strategies. Of course, there is something. It's what is written in the paper, and what the institutions are capable to implement. Of course, there's a problem. We have to go through this, but it's not the case here. But I will present some data that show that if you take the last 15 years, including some of these initiatives from the public policy aspect, we have been producing quite good results. Our paper is focused on these 10 institutions. We choose 3 universities, 3 public research centers, and 4 Brazilian companies, both private and public companies. We make this selection with not very strictly criteria. We have to take these data as a very preliminary data. We are going deep in this analysis. This is just to produce in a brief time, in a short time, some general information about what's going on with patents related to some of the most important innovation institutions in Brazil. And here is part of the data that we have found. This is when you take those 10 institutions from 1999 to 2006, we have some very interesting numbers. In the top of the list is Petrobras. I think this the first very interesting information. Petrobras is, you probably know, the state-owned company focused on oil and gas and moving for other energy sectors like biofuels, etc., but focus on oil and gas. And they are the champion in terms of patents in Brazil. And look, the first patent of Petrobras, it's back to 1976. It's our own state-owned company, focused on a very traditional area like oil and gas. But part of the success of Petrobras is linked with this, not for this reserves that we have just found. Yeah. The second, third, and fourth in this rank is universities. When you take all these institutions, but look the data, when they start producing or filing patents. 1989, Unicamp. That's today. We have the Diogenes here, representative of this Innova and at Unicamp. But it's a very recent process. You know? Embrapa, that we will discuss further. Fiocruz, that is another state-owned company focused in biotech. Natura Butantan, that's another state-owned laboratory. Biolab, that's a private company. And Embraer. Why I make this circle around Petrobras is because I think it's amazing, this Petrobras in the top of this rank. But the most important aspect here is how Embraer, in clear contrast with Petrobras, is dealing with patents. We take this data until 2006. You know probably Embraer. Embraer is a company focused on middle-size aircrafts, producing that by privatized. This company by privatizing 1992, 1993, and now in 10, 15 years after, yeah, a top-level company. But look how interesting is the number of patents. They are changing. We have a seminar, a discussion in Brazil, and they are really changed this very quickly. They have just produced, organized a legal department inside the Embraer, just focus on in patent everything inside Embraer. But it's a decision that has, I think, have 2 years. But Embraer goes through this internationalization process with not patent protection, and now is suffering, I think, for different areas, pressure and problems related to this strategy that not linked to patents. If you take the general registration of patents application in Brazil during this period, look the graph. We have clearly a very important increase in the patent application in Brazil. If you take the industrial property law as a reference, we can perceive that even before this patent law was being approved, but during the process of discussion of this, the impact on the patent application dynamics was very, very important. And this movement of patent application have been growing until 2005. Something happened. We are just discussing what going on here, that we have in the last 2 years a decrease of these patent applications. I think it's not that problematic as we discussed previously, because part of this data just focus on the numbers and do not take the quality of the patents. For sure, there is a learning process in this during this period that are reflecting more quality in the patents applications. So anyway, it's just to present some of the data that probably will raise other questions for the discussion. When we take these 10 institutions, we have other important informations. Look, the green area of this graph is the private companies. So there is a clear link of the private companies, patent applications, and the approval of the intellectual property law. So this is a turning point in our process. And good public policies clearly affect the dynamics of the innovation sector in Brazil. This was, I think, the first important movement. But when you take the other public policy that has been included in this framework of the Brazilian environment, we have been producing quite good stuffs. Universities keep a very important presence in this scenario, but I think what really changed was the relevance of private companies, not just private, and research institutions. On the other hand, what we have, the years, okay, the time-consuming process that involves the approval of the granting of patents are increasing in Brazil. Even though the modernization process in ANPE is taking place, I think in a very serious way, they are not producing enough results comparing with the dynamics of the innovation sector that's pushing pressure, even more pressure on these demands. Look, the average to approve, to have a granted patent is 7.2 years, when all the others, the average in the World Patents Agency is 2.4. And I will finalize with this. that's another, I think, trend that we have to look at with more careful and attention, is when you compare these 10 institutions' dynamics related to patents and compare what they are doing in the Brazilian patent office, that means applying patents, applying domestically, internationally, we have a problem here that we have to deal with. There is increasing of in the trend that the Brazilian institutions goes to the international patent office other than to Brazilian patent office. There is different questions related to this, but what we can see probably when interview these people, there is no international efficiency when you go just to Brazilian patent office. You have to, of course, innovation is related to global market, not to Brazilian market. So if enough, you don't have efficiency enough for the legal aspect for your patent, you go direct to the international one. And I'm finalizing. Paulo is looking too angry for me. But look, Fiocruz and Butantan, these two biotech state-owned companies, are in the top of the rank in terms of international and applying patents internationally. That is very interesting because the same group of people are pressing, or part of them are dealing with this problem, like the compulsory license that is exactly involving this biotech area. And the Brazilian state-owned companies go through this problem direct to international patent office, but another issue to discuss. And finally, we have a very important concentration when we take these 10 institutions in health, pharmaceutical, and food sectors. If you take all this institution, almost 70% is related to this area. So that means that we have something. I will not go through this. I can take this part of the discussion after other positions. But I think we have a general framework about what's going on in terms of patents and innovation in Brazil. The importance of public policies relate to this, the framework, the legal framework involving this, but also the market dynamics that involve private companies and state-owned companies and multinational companies. That's not included here. But I think we go further in this research. We have new materials, even from colleagues from the university that we have just met. And I think in another opportunity we can continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. All the presentations here, the PowerPoints, will be available at our website. So I would like to invite Roberto now to start his presentation, and I'll give you 15 American minutes.
Yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Paulo and on behalf of the Institute Brazil and the Woodrow Wilson Center invited me for making this presentation. I regret that I have to initiate disagreeing with Ricardo because and this disagreement has an explanation. When he ranked the institutions in terms of innovation, Petrobras appeared number one, but number one in effect is Embrapa, because Embrapa has utilized one of the flexibility of the TRIPS agreement to have sui generis protection for plant varieties, which is very appropriate and proper to agriculture. And if you add the number of plant varieties protections of Embrapa registered and protected with the patents of Embrapa, you go beyond the number of patent applications of Petrobras. Okay, so in effect, this disagreement has an explanation because he was only analyzing the patent applications. But we are going to see the experience of the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation and the roles of the patents and biotechnology in accelerating the growth of the Brazilian agriculture. And I will try, I will apologize in the beginning because I will go very fast. I would like not you to miss any part of my presentation. Well, Brazil was used to be a food importer in the 70s, and currently the country is the second food exported in the world. So there is a big change in about 3 decades. And the result of this change, it's in the process that started in the 70s. At that time, the military regime in Brazil had designed that the country should be very strong into industry. There was an industrialization process. And this industrialization process brought a number of people from rural areas to the capitals. There was a huge, massive urban development in Brazil in the 70s, in the 80s, and this process continued until the late 90s, and nowadays it's changing again because development, people are seeing that in rural areas, the development. And you see the indicators of employment in Brazil are much better in rural areas than in the urban areas, the current situation. So that industrialization process brought a lot of people to the urban areas, and it was necessary to have food for all these people, because while they were in rural areas, they could survive with their own property, their own agriculture, and the fish that they have, everything was free from the nature. Now in the urban areas, they had a position and employment, but they needed food to buy. So the creation of Embrapa is related to that vision, the vision of an industrialization process for the future of the country and the need to feed the people who are going to be employees of this industrialization process. So you see that Embrapa then was created in 73, and then you see the productivity gains that have been the result of Embrapa. You have the whole historical series. You see up to 73, the productivity is quite stable, and then you see after the creation of Embrapa, the productivity in cereals, fruits, vegetables, fibers, and oil, seeds, and the grains. It has sharply increased, and we see later on the reason for all of this. This is quite interesting because it's related to that vision that I mentioned, investment industry, and a lot of investment in industry and few investment in agriculture. And if you see this black line is the total government expenditures, you see it has grown significantly, while in agriculture it had a growth in the 80s, but has remained quite stable. In effect, it has decreased, and you see the red line is the percentage. So Brazil is enjoying a very competitive position. The Brazilian agriculture is enjoying a very competitive position, but this has not been the result of a massive government investment. Investment has gone in another direction, but for agriculture, that has not been the key element of the government strategy. It's almost incidental that we are in that situation. The Embrapa's institutional mission, just to position, is to seek and implement sustainable development solutions for the rural space, focusing on Brazilian agribusiness through the generation, adaptation, and transfer of knowledge and technology in order to benefit the whole Brazilian society. So we have very important concepts that the concept of sustainable development for the solution of the rural space, Brazilian agribusiness sector. We cannot do it on your own. You cannot do research on your own and without having the output be involved, through the generation, adaptation, and transfer of knowledge and technology. So to be able to transfer and generate knowledge and technology, you have to have the property of the technology. It's very important. We in Brazil are very used to tangible assets. When we are going to purchase a house, you see the whole history. If the house has no problem with financing banks or debts or whatever. But when we talk about intangible assets that allow the knowledge to circulate, that will be finally your property, that will allow you to transfer, we are not used to it. There is not a culture. It is there is a new trend to protect our industrial, intellectual property assets in order to benefit the whole Brazilian society. And the annual budget of Embrapa is about $700 million US dollars, which is quite substantive. And 85% come from the government, and there is an own funding already of 15%. Some of them come from the royalties that Embrapa is enjoying these days. The human resource, for you to have an idea, of course, the position of Embrapa, of the Brazilian agriculture, is not incidental. It's the result of massive investment in capacity of human resources. And Embrapa has 8,600 employees and 2,300 researchers. Out of them, 53% are PhD doctors and 45% have Master of Science, and only 2% of bachelors. And this Embrapa nowadays does not recruit any more bachelors. They recruit only PhD and Master of Science. And this is a figure that helps us to understand when the organization was created. You have the black line, the bachelors, okay, and Master of Science and doctors. At that time that Embrapa was created in 73, 74, there were not postgraduate courses for agriculture in Brazil. Okay? You see, most of them that were recruited, the black line was very high at that time. They were recruited in Brazil bachelors. There was not one single university with a postgraduate program in agriculture. And you know where all these people came to do the master and PhD? Here in the US. 98% of Embrapa's researchers came to American universities to do the Master of Science and PhDs. And that was the result. Only 2% went to Europe, and most of them to France. Right? So 98% of all these people were trained in American universities. And you see the progress and the results of this training. The red line sharply increasing, and the black line basically going to zero. We'll have only 2%. And this interaction with American universities was very, very good for the Brazilian agriculture. Not only for the capacity that was transferred and the education that these people had acquired in American universities, but the relationship American professors, Brazilian students have brought to Brazilian universities professors, American professors that have helped to establish it and create centers of excellence in agricultural research in Brazilian universities. And the University Federal of Viçosa is one of those that the program of post-graduation was designed by North American scientists. And also the entrepreneurial mentality from the US is very present in Embrapa people. So Embrapa has 39 research centers, the network of Embrapa, 11 out of which 11 are thematic centers, 15 national commodity centers, 13 eco-regional agroforestry centers, 3 special services, one of them is transfer of technology. Embrapa has LabX, which is a kind of a virtual laboratory here in USDA in the US, and in the ARS, in Europe, in France, in the Netherlands, and in two countries, and now has been established an Embrapa in Africa, in Accra, capital of Ghana. This is how these countries, these R&D centers are spread in the country. You have Brazil, of course, is a huge country like the U.S., but you have a lot of different ecoregional systems. You have the Amazon region, you have the semi-arid region, you have the Cerrados, it's like a savanna, which is the main agricultural development area. And so they are spread all over the country to take advantage of the different of soil, climate, eco-regional, and different capacities. The new targets objective of Embrapa is it was created recently. Embrapa Agri-Energy. Embrapa Africa was created to transfer tropical agricultural technology to African countries that are more or less in the same tropical zone. Embrapa South America was established in Caracas recently. It's been discussed in Embrapa Central America in Panama City. And the LabEx Europe was originally LabEx France and has become LabEx Europe. Just to show that it's also under discussion a LabEx, a virtual laboratory in Asia. That Embrapa has become a multinational company. It's no longer to develop agriculture and food for the Brazilians in the urban process, because agriculture is today nowadays a major issue on trade negotiations. In the agri-energy, you have the targets of the Embrapa agri-energy. It's sugarcane, it's ethanol and bagasse is a source of energy, but also pulp for ethanol, oil and fat for biodiesel, cultivated energetic forests for coal, residues and byproducts biogas. So all of these are part of the Embrapa agri-energy program. It's not only ethanol, but also this the whole agenda. I will go quickly because Paulo is giving me a few minutes, and I have more interesting things to show to you. But Embrapa International Corporation, just to show to you this, my statement that it's a multinational company now, Embrapa has bilateral agreement with 71 institutions, sister organizations, in 40 countries. 68 sister institutions of Embrapa, and has multilateral agreements with 20 international organizations. So the international component in Embrapa is very present in the day-to-day business of the organization. These are where the technical assistance has been. You see a lot in the tropical zone. The maps are not well, the colors are not good, but you see the cooperation with Embrapa is the deployment of its technical, of tropical agriculture technology capacity. Let's go quickly. This is to show that this is the total area that Brazil has utilized. It's basically the utilization of the Cerrados, that is the savanna area. The Cerrados represents 22% of the national territory of Brazil, and up to the 70s, this area was considered useless for agriculture. It is thanks to Embrapa's innovation and centers of Cerrados, eco-regional center, that it was possible to introduce agricultural production in this area. And this area is nowadays responsible for the main food production capacity of the country. And just for you to have an idea, in 2006, the Department of State of the U.S. Granted the World Food Prize, that's like the Nobel Prize for Agriculture, to 3 scientists. One is the former Minister of Agriculture of Brazil, Alisson Paulinelli, who has created Embrapa. Right? The other, for 3 persons, the other person is the first president of Embrapa Cerrados that developed the strategy to develop the Cerrados. And the third one is an American professor that went to Embrapa Cerrado and have assisted in the development of that technology to develop that area. So this is just also helps to see how the area, the frontiers of agriculture. You see that we are not utilizing the Amazon region for food production. Okay, so the Amazon region is almost preserved there, and then you see that the main expansion of agriculture from 96 to 75 and 2005 is in the Cerrados area, the occupation of the Cerrados. This again, I have already mentioned that 22% of the national territory is nowadays responsible for 50% of the grain production, 40% of the cattle, and the rotation of agricultural crops has already put also that region in 50% of the cotton production of the country. This is the result of Embrapa in 2005 harvest. Number one in coffee, sugarcane, orange, second in banana, beef. You have this whole rank. Whatever commodity, agricultural commodity you put, you have Brazil in the first position. So it's the strength of the economy of the country is the agricultural position. The grain, grain production, the productivity has increased. The production has increased sharply, while the increase has been very marginal. So there has been a significant gain of productivity. And this comes from innovation. And you see that productivity increasing significantly and sharply in the end of the 90s and nowadays, in the early 2000s. Also, you have meat production, the increase of meat, poultry, and broiler and porks, so significantly from the end of the 90s to the early 2000s. No? And this position of second largest food exported is recent. It was in 2005 that the country became the second largest food exporter. So I will, the world ranking of Brazil is ethanol, sugar, coffee, orange juice, and this is just to confirm the role of Embrapa. No? The industrial property law was enacted in 96, plant variety in 97. The creation of an IP culture in Embrapa has evolved to transfer of technology in 96, for an IP service in 2000, in innovation management program in 2007. Innovation has become more comprehensive to see the whole process from R&D to the deployment. So the whole. This is the result of Embrapa. We have from 96 to 2006 patent applications, trademarks, plant varieties, software programs. In the last 7 years, 8 times more applications than in the 18 years before the IP policy and culture change. This is another thing which is extremely important. Embrapa has 1,400 license agreements with the private sector, with the industry, with the seed industry, with the multinational companies that and Brazilian companies that are there, and 20 R&D partnership programs. So you cannot do, you cannot be a global player in agriculture without partnership and discriminate national and multinational capital. It's a multinational company. We are going. The agricultural sector is going international. No? And this has been, I have already mentioned, showing to you some figures regarding the grain production and the cultivated area and the productivity that has grown from 1.5 tons per hectare to 2.8 tons per hectare. So this just to show that 32% of the plant varieties registered in Brazil come from Embrapa. 1/3 of the plant varieties registered in the Brazilian sui generis protection system are owned from Embrapa, is by large the first one. The evolution of royalties of patents and seeds has grown significantly, and in 2007, 23 million, in 2008, 32 million, and the Embrapa investment, because the budget of Embrapa is about 1.1 billion reais, so it's $700 million US, but the investment R&D budget is only 184 million, which is the budget that goes to R&D programs. The other part of the budget is salaries, infrastructure, energy, whatever, travel, transportation. But the money that goes to R&D is 184 million. And you see that is significant, the importance of the royalties to that money, to the new seed money in R&D, and it's growing. And with the growth of, and it's cumulative. Every year it's more royalties. The more you have more license agreement, this becomes cumulative, and very soon this will be 50% of the total budget investment R&D budget of Embrapa. This is something, the number of patent applications in the developed countries and developing countries is an Embrapa picture. You see that despite all this strength of the Brazilian agriculture, Brazil is number of patent application is still very low compared to India, China, and other emerging economies. And this should be another subject. I have to go quickly to the conclusion. This is the conclusions, Paulo. Okay. So it is the innovation process of Embrapa that made Brazil the second global food exporter. Without innovation, the vision was this country should be industrialized country, but the industry of the country has not been a main driving force of the country. Although we have Embraer, we have Petrobras, we have a lot of industries, but it's not the main driving force of the country. The second global food exporter position, it's thanks to the R&D that Embrapa has done. Agriculture is a key trade factor in Brazil. The strength of Brazilian negotiation power in multilateral trade forum is the Brazilian agriculture. It's the position of Brazilian agriculture that drives the whole agenda of the Brazilian negotiators. The Brazilian contribution to food security, it is becoming more and more important because Brazil itself cannot be the reply to food security, but the Brazilian tropical agricultural technology deployed to Africa can help a lot to provide the food security which is necessary for the global demand. And this global demand is becoming very important because China, with the growth of almost 10% every year in the last 10 years, has now 500 million more people ready to purchase food, and they need food for their day-to-day life. You know? So food security, and that's why the price of commodities are very high. Food security is a main fundamental element. No? Functional food trends and development. This the R&D, the question of nanotechnology and biotechnology that are allowing to have functional foods where you have vitamins, proteins, fibers, and food is becoming part also of the health system to allow people to good food to have a healthier life. No? And the leadership, and these two main conclusions, the leadership requires partnership. You cannot occupy a leading position without partnership. And then the partnership, you have the Brazilian government company with trained people abroad, with an entrepreneurship mentality, doing partnership with the private sector, multinational and national company, and the farming sector. All of them are in the hands of the private sector. It's a government vision, protected technology, Embrapa patents, Embrapa plant varieties, transferred to the private sector, reaching the farming sector. And the people from Embrapa are used to work with the private sector. When we visit and we talk to the researchers, they have a different mentality. They are not only researchers, they are entrepreneurs. And to be a global player requires innovation protection. You cannot go and have your technology deployed to other countries if your technology is not protected. And Embrapa has a conscience of this. The management of the innovation process program is part of the main strategic approach of the organization, the strategy of the organization for its sustainable development. Thank you very much. Paul.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I'd like to invite now Steve Marrow, who, as I told you, accompanied us last November in one of the seminars in this series, and that had the experience to enjoy some very innovative chorinho in the neighborhood of Pinheiros in São Paulo.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paulo. Maybe I could ask Alan Wright to show me where he put my slides. I have just a handful, and it gives me an opportunity to thank not only Paulo for inviting me, but Alan as well. They're a remarkable team, I must say. I'm not a Brazil expert, and so I'm going to be very brief and provide you all, many of whom are experts, a full opportunity to comment and ask questions. My comments are in two parts. One is to talk about Brazilian patents from a slightly different perspective for a very few minutes, and then perhaps make a philosophical comment that's really as much about the United States as it is about Brazil. Both speakers, Ricardo and Roberto, alluded to this at the end of their remarks, which is it's important, certainly domestically, what Brazilian institutions, enterprises are doing in terms of intellectual property and what the domestic and policy environment is for intellectual property. But it's much more important in a global economy where high-tech services and products are located throughout the world, and their production and distribution are located throughout the world, and competition is global. How intellectual property is handled globally, not just within individual countries. So I wanted to, was prompted by their presentations, I thought it would be interesting to take a look more specifically at Brazilian patenting in an international context from two perspectives. One is Brazilian patenting abroad, especially in developed economies and especially in the United States, and Brazilian patenting at home in comparison with other countries. And fortunately, we have good data, or presumably good data, both from the U.S. Patent Office and from WIPO to draw some conclusions about this. So this slide shows Brazil in comparison with BRIC plus countries, China, India, Israel, and South Africa and Russia, in terms of their acquisition of U.S. patent grants in the last 10 years. And the obvious conclusion is that compared with India, China, and Israel, let alone countries like Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, Brazilian patenting in the U.S. has not really increased at all, and is on a par with Russia and South Africa. In terms of patent applications, Brazilian filings have shown a slightly better performance, but are not in the same league with any of the countries I mentioned, China, India, and Israel. Here are the, for comparison with the domestic patent grantees, here are the Brazilian recipients of U.S. patents over the last 4 or 5 years, at least those with more than 10 patents. And here are the very diverse areas of technology in which Brazilian entities or individuals have received U.S. patents in that period of time. Now, you probably won't be able to see this, but here are some WIPO data that show that the Brazilian office, in a relatively short time, has become the 20th largest patent granting office in the world, but most of the patents granted domestically by the Brazilian office go to non-resident inventors. That's not atypical of emerging and less developed economies. In Brazil's case, it's over 90%. Now, that probably underestimates the extent of domestic inventive activity, because resident and non-resident are distinguished on the basis of who the first inventor on the application is. So you will undoubtedly find collaborators on patent applications, Brazilian collaborators on patent applications that are, for data purposes, assigned to non-resident entities. WIPO also does some interesting things under the heading of estimating patent intensity per million population per $1 billion GDP per $1 million of R&D spending. And here the variation among countries is very wide and it's hard to interpret, but in general, in this respect, Brazil, again, you'll not be able to see it on the slide unless you go to the website, but with respect to GDP, Brazil is on a par with several southern and eastern European countries and India. And with respect to R&D, the last slide, it's on a par with Denmark, Canada, Finland, and Switzerland. So there does appear to be significant movement in some economic statistics. And obviously, most impressively, with respect to agricultural production, diversification, and exports. Which leads me to the general point I wanted to make, which is that Roberto's presentation reminds me that the agricultural sector was the United States' first great innovation success. And it was accomplished, as in the case of Brazil, with very significant government involvement via the university land grant college system and the agricultural extension service, which brought the results of research to farmers, large and small. And what we are seeing today, it seems to me, is a greater vitality in the part of Brazil and a number of other countries with respect to innovation policy than we are in the seeing in the United States. This is not a partisan statement because I think Congress and the administration have cooperated in neglecting innovation policy in the last few years, in dismantling a skeletal policy apparatus in the Commerce Department, in shifting modest but demonstrably successful programs like the Advanced Technology program in the Department of Commerce, in capping investment in biomedical research. They did, with great effort and great encouragement on the part of the Council on Competitiveness and the National Academy of Sciences, pass landmark legislation, the America Competes Act, but much of it remains unimplemented and largely unfunded. Patent reform legislation is languages in Congress. The tax framework for innovation remains uncertain. So in a variety of respects, we have in the United States a very big agenda. And it's my hope that the example of Brazil and other countries, in addition to Brazil, will reinvigorate the discussion and action in the United States, not simply because there will be demonstrably more powerful competitors to the United States, but it will become obvious that the benefits to enterprises and to workers in those countries will be something that we have to take notice of. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Well, the floor is open for questions. Alan has the mic. I think Matthew also. And if you want to... Yeah, please identify yourselves when you ask a question.
Hi, I'm Tom Bombellis with Merck, and this is not a question about compulsory licensing. But rather, I wanted to ask Ricardo and also Roberto, given the relative importance of both Petrobras and Embrapa in the Brazilian economic structure, one of the frustrations that a lot of intellectual property creators have in Brazil is the lengthy time for patenting. So my question is really, why haven't these two institutions, or can they be more effective in getting the government to invest in a more efficient system, which doesn't necessarily have to be investing in INPI as it has to maybe mutual recognition, etc. But again, given the importance of these two institutions in the economy, it seems in everybody's interest that intellectual property rights be granted in a more timely and efficient manner inside the country itself.
Let's be brief in our answers, please.
Well, I give my own perception, and basically the figure that Steve has shown, where INPI in Brazil, the patent filings, the vast majority come from abroad, and very few patent applications have originated in the country. And there is a perception which is wrong, and we can see it. It has changed. The current management of INPI has done a lot to improve that and to reduce the backlog, and we have seen great progress. Although, despite this great progress, has not been sufficient, but there has been significant progress. So, intellectual property was perceived by INPI staff as something of interest of foreign companies. Okay, so they do not have, that was a mentality from the 80s that is still present there in some low-level staff, not in the management. And as a public service, is a difficult institution to manage people, the question of motivation, salaries. The growth has been, the development, the improvement have been significant, but not sufficient. That's my perception.
Just to add some information here, I think the two institutions that you mentioned are state-owned institutions. It's very difficult for them to pressure other state-owned institutions. But I would say that this is a role that the private sector should take, and there is some change happening in this private sector. The group of companies and researchers and research centers that start to push and contribute to improve this performance, I think it's the good news in this scenario.
Yes, please.
Maria Berliner with Latin Intelligence. Given the difficulty of protecting intellectual property in China and in Africa, how is Embrapa protecting its intellectual property in both regions?
Well, the experience of Embrapa in deploying technology abroad is quite recent. Has not started yet. The vision is there, but the deployment, the first countries that Embrapa is cooperating in Africa now is Ghana in the agri-energy, and Embrapa will build Embrapa in the private sector, Brazilian private sector, will be an ethanol plant production in Ghana. The difficulty is there, but of course we count with the in African countries there are two main issues. The question of the national legislation updated, so you know that the LDC countries still have extended deadline for certain protection of to join the TRIPS agreement, and also those that have a legislation, in effect, the enforcement of the legislation in place. I am sure that the experience of Embrapa will not be different from the experience of the others are experiencing in African countries. And I believe that that's why organizations such as WIPO, that has a good program for capacity buildings, are becoming more and more important, so that it will ensure that the tropical agricultural technology, and especially the agri-energy technology that will go to African countries, which will be fundamental to their development, will be able to generate a sustainable process. And we cannot do that. Nobody will do that without an investor. And the investors will want to make sure that what they are going to do in African countries in terms of agri-energy, in terms of food production, it will be protected and will create a sustainable process.
Yes, Deborah.
commend all the panelists for their outstanding presentations. It was tremendous knowledge, and thank you. I have a question. Given that the U.S. and Brazil now have so much intertwined economic activity and leadership, and many Brazilian global enterprises have invested in the United States, Gerdau being one, owning many U.S. enterprises, etc. What do you think we need to do to accelerate getting a U.S.-Brazil by National Investment Treaty? I know it requires some legislative changes in Brazil, but it's really at the heart of what we're talking about, and it's kind of a shame that, you know, the U.S. has these treaties with small countries all over the world, but the two big partners we don't. So I want to throw that out as something we should think about, and how would we accomplish that?
To try, and then
It's very hard to answer your question. As you said, this is an issue that the Brazilian government decide to not go ahead. There is a lot of changes in domestic legislation that have to be made, and I think Brazil will not in the short term have other position on this issue. Of course, it's very important. It's related to the other economic aspects, not strictly to this. But I think in this partnership in short term is not very feasible.
Yeah, let me add something to that. In yesterday and today's news regarding the collapse of the Doha round, Minister Celso Amorim mentioned that now where we are going to explore other venues on bilateral trade. What we know for sure that Brazil will take the ethanol issue to the WTO. That's supposedly a negative, but obviously other issues will be explored in terms of cooperation in the United States, looking for areas where cooperation is possible. So I believe, from what I read in the paper, that it's time for those who believe in engagement in bilateral relationship to talk, to speak up, because we are now in a transition to something more intense in bilateral relations that we don't know yet what it is. I think I have a question in the back.
Sorry, is this on? Yes, my name is Reeve Wolford. I worked with the Brazil-U.S. Business Council at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for 8 years, and am now with Altruist Group. And this is a question about the big bugbear, which is the cotton case. We are now looking at the possibility of Brazil cross-retaliating to compensate for $4 billion by their calculation of damages to the Brazilian industry by targeting intellectual property in Brazil. My question is this: given that Brazil is attempting to become an innovator, and Embrapa itself is by your admission, Mr. Castelo Branco, looking to fund itself with royalties, many of which presumably will come from abroad, how do you view this as a precedent?
Well, there are 2 points here. One is the question of the right of the country to retaliate in terms of a decision in the World Trade Organization, and the convenience of this retaliation. This is one point. And the second point is, given that there would be a decision to retaliate, why to do in another sector, like intellectual property? So that there are 2 issues in your question. So the first issue, the decision to retaliate, I believe that Brazil has, I'm not a diplomat, but my experience in WIPO is that Brazil has come to a point where they want WTO rules to be enforced, and also, and this is good. In the end, it's to have an organization, irrespective it's a case between the U.S. and Brazil. Unfortunately, it's a case between U.S. and Brazil, but there are cases between Brazil and Argentina. That is a major Mercosur partner, and there are disputes in. So I believe that the decision of Brazil is a decision to favor the strength of the organization, WTO. If the organization is there are rules, so they should be enforced, they should be observed. One point. The question now, the reply to the second question, is this decision, is it wise to retaliate to a sector that is different from the major sector that is involved? And how this would impact a country that is becoming strong thanks to this, to its own innovation process. My contacts with the people in the cotton business in Brazil, they say that to retaliate the American cotton exporters to Brazil would not reach that level of $4 billion because the U.S. cotton export to Brazil are minimal. Okay, so it would not have the amount of money to retaliate on that. Okay. And the second point also is that the same sector, the cotton farmers of Brazil, they are involved with the industry for oil from cotton, so that if they put penalties in the cotton coming to the U.S., they would have to increase the cost of the oil cotton manufactured in Brazil. Okay? So the Brazilian cotton farmers are not interested to charge and to penalize the American cotton farmers. So what remained to the government was our foreign service. It was to have to choose a sector that would, let's say, put on the other side of the dispute cause a harm. Okay, could the other side say, well, there are rules in WTO. If you do not observe, you are going to penalize in a sector which is you find it is important. Okay. Well, is the decision wise? What are the consequences in the long run? This is my perception. I don't think that to penalize the IP it's a wise decision for Brazil, because it will damage the image of the country in terms of as promoting as a country that it's competitive, and if you are the second largest food exporter, you are competitive. You have to be competitive. It's the competitiveness of the Brazilian agriculture that will allow to remain in that position. It's the competitiveness of the Brazilian agriculture that will allow the other partners to be interested to receive the Brazilian agriculture tropical technology. Okay? And this is the main strength of the country, of the economy of the country. It's 34% of the GDP of Brazil is agricultural sector. Is about 60% of our exports is the agricultural sector. So I don't think it will be wise. The other issue which is related to your question is also the question of food security and health. Very two fundamental points. The issue of access to health have a precedence to intellectual property rights. The right to access to health to have a precedence to intellectual property rights, which is a position that Brazil has adopted in international forum. Okay? It becomes very difficult when you come which of the two should have a precedence, the right to food security or the right to access to health. It's very difficult to reply to that. While in the first, the Brazilian government believes that the reply is good and the country has been successful in international organization to promote that vision, that rationale. This second position is very difficult because is it worth to treat a human being if he has not food? Is it what is the precedence? Is food security or access to health?
Well, thank you, Roberto. Daniel, you want to say something? And then I will conclude after that because we have to move immediately to the next panel. We are running behind here. Daniel Pinto from the Brazilian Embassy.
Hi, I'm Daniel Pinto from the Brazilian Embassy. I follow intellectual property at the embassy. This was a very interesting question, actually, about what kind of precedent would Brazil set by, as we say, cross-retaliating. The proper term would be suspending concessions or other obligations under the dispute settlement understanding of the WTO. Well, I can tell you that as a diplomat, as someone who believes in intellectual property rights, that no one in Brazil is looking forward to doing this. No one. Not a single person. Well, maybe one single person, I don't know. But we are really, really hoping to see a positive outcome to this cotton case, which has been going on for too long. Now, I mentioned the wording of your question about precedent. Because, well, first we think that the fact that the United States are not implementing the decisions of the WTO are themselves a very bad precedent, especially at a time like this when we all worked through a tremendous effort to make this Doha round work. And, well, now for the precedent that Brazil would be setting, it's not really a precedent because nothing would be done without the authorization of the WTO, of the dispute settlement body. So, and actually Brazil has never done anything in intellectual property that would not properly authorized either by the WTO or under WTO rules. And this goes also, of course, for this discussion of health and intellectual property rights. Even in the case of Merck, the compulsory license, this was done fully under the procedure set forth in the TRIPS agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. My instinct as a journalist tells me, and knowing that professionals from Itamaraty are very disciplined people, I would tell you that, Brazilians interested in this issue should look for something else to retaliate, and Americans interested in a good resolution should keep the pressure on so the United States abide by the rule of law and comply. And with that, we are going to move to the second panel, and we have, I'm not going to have a break here because we are running behind. I will invite the speakers of the second panel to come up here, and we will start immediately.